This narrative is titled, Stepmom and Dad Went on Vacation with Their Daughter, Leaving Me Alone and Mocking Me. They taunted me, calling me a freeloader living in their house as if I owned it. So, I made sure they didn't come back into my home. Hey everyone! Before we dive into today's video, I need your support. We've noticed the channel isn't gaining as much attention lately, and subscribing is one of the best ways you can help us out. It's quick, free, and enables us to keep delivering great content. Your support means everything to us. Let's grow this channel together. Thanks so much. Now, let's get into the video. I didn't argue. I was a mess. I had just lost my mom, my rock, and the idea of being alone in that big, silent house scared me. Diane put on her best sympathetic face, acting like she was there for me, while Maya wandered through the house like it was her playground. I remember sitting in my mom's office, which was now mine, staring at her degrees and her neatly organized financial books. She had worked so hard to make sure I had a home, and yet I couldn't even bring myself to touch her things. I let Dad and Diane take the spare room, and Maya took what used to be Mom's craft room. By the end of the summer, I was preparing to leave for college out of state. "No, it's not," I said, my voice steady. "It's mine, and I want you out." Dad finally stepped forward, looking like he wanted to fix everything with a single sentence. "Ellie, please," he pleaded, his voice trembling. "We don't have anywhere to go right now. Just give us a few weeks." I held up my hand. "No." His face crumbled. "Please, sweetheart. I know I messed up, but we're family." "Family doesn't treat each other like this," I shot back. "You let this happen," I said. "You let Diane think this was her house. You let her treat me like garbage, and you stood there and said nothing." Dad didn't have anything to say to that. He just looked down at the floor like a scolded child. Diane, however, wasn't ready to give up. "You're a selfish little girl," she spat. "You think you're so high and mighty because of this house. You wouldn't even have it if it weren't for your father." I laughed bitterly. My father had nothing to do with this house. Mom bought it with her own money, before you or him were even part of the picture. She made sure it would be mine, because she knew I couldn't count on him. That's when Dad brought up the idea of them staying permanently one morning over breakfast. He pushed his coffee aside and said, "Ellie, what if we stayed here while you're at school? You won't have to worry about bills, maintenance, or the house sitting empty. It'll be good for all of us." That shut her up. I turned back to Dad. "You can take your stuff and leave. I'm done with this." For a moment, no one moved. Diane glared at me like she wanted to lunge at me, but Dad finally nodded. His shoulders slumped in defeat. "Fine," he whispered. It took them about an hour to load their things into the car. Diane didn't stop muttering under her breath the entire time, calling me names and swearing about how ungrateful I was. Dad just looked hollow. Maya stayed quiet, helping carry things without a word. When they were done, Dad knocked on the door one last time. I didn't open it. I watched from the window as they drove away, Diane's voice still faintly audible through the glass. The house was quiet again. When they were gone, for the first time in years, it felt like it belonged to me, like it belonged to Mom. I sat down on the couch and let out a breath I hadn't realized I was holding. They were gone. Finally. 2 months have passed since that day. Dad still tries to call from random numbers, but I don't answer. Some relationships can't be fixed. And honestly, I don't want to. I'm focusing on myself now. My job is great. I've made friends at work, and I'm slowly healing from all of this. I planted new roses in Mom's garden, ones she would have loved, and I'm finally at peace here. To anyone reading this who's dealing with toxic family, sometimes you have to let go. You don't owe anyone your peace, especially not those who take advantage of you. Mom made sure I'd always have a home, and now I'm making sure I honor her by living in it the way she intended. Diane, flipping pancakes at the stove, added, "We'll take care of everything, Ellie. The house will be in perfect condition when you come home." At the time, it made sense. They had been decent housemates over the summer. Diane had even softened a bit, cooking meals for me and inviting me to her strange little book club meetings where middle-aged women gushed over bad romance novels. Maya started calling me her cool sister, which, I'll admit, warmed my heart a little. So, I agreed. I didn't see any harm in it. I trusted them. Over the next 4 years, I came home for breaks and holidays, and honestly, it was okay. Diane would make huge welcome home dinners, Dad would tell his silly jokes, and Maya would show me her latest middle school drama. I started to believe we were this strange but functional blended family. Sure, there were small things, like Diane rearranging the furniture or making subtle comments about the house, but I shrugged them off. It wasn't worth causing a scene. When I called Dad during my senior year of college to tell him I had accepted a job back in my hometown, he seemed thrilled. "That's great, Ellie. We'll have the house ready for you," he said. I didn't think twice about it. I graduated, packed up, and made the long trip home, excited to start this new chapter. I should have known something was wrong when the taxi pulled up to the house, and I noticed new curtains in the windows. Little things had changed. The rose bushes Mom planted were still there, but they were pruned differently. The front porch looked repainted. I didn't think much of it until I walked up to the door, pulled out my key, and realized it didn't fit. That's when everything started to fall apart. I'll never forget the exact moment I realized something was seriously wrong. The taxi dropped me off on a warm, sunny afternoon. It felt like the perfect day to start fresh. I was 22, job in hand, ready to move back into the house I had always thought would be mine. I even paused to stand in front of the house, suitcase in hand, breathing in that mix of roses and fresh-cut grass. Mom's rose bushes were still there, but they had been trimmed differently. Rounded, like the way Diane always shaped things. It was those small details that stood out first. I walked up the porch, pulled out my key, and tried to unlock the door, already picturing my first night back in my room. But the key didn't turn. I tried again. Nothing. I froze, staring at the door like maybe I'd forgotten how locks worked. I jiggled the key, turned it harder. Still nothing. Maybe I was just tired, or the lock was jammed, I thought. I knocked on the door, still half smiling, still hopeful. A moment later, Diane opened the door, wearing an apron, looking like she had just been baking, flour smudges on her hands. For half a second, her face went completely blank before she forced a smile and asked, "Ellie, what are you doing here?" That question hit me like a slap. What was I doing there? I lived there, or at least I thought I did. Hello, Reddit. I need to get something off my chest because, even months later, I'm still processing everything that happened. I'll try not to ramble, but this story started years ago, and I honestly never saw it coming until it hit me like a freight train. I'm Ellie, 22 years old, and what I'm about to share isn't some fabricated family drama. This is my life, and I never imagined I'd be posting something like this here. But hey, life works in mysterious ways. I managed to stammer, I'm moving back home. I told you guys about this, remember?" Her smile faltered. "Oh, right," she said, like she just remembered something she'd forgotten to add to her shopping list. She stepped aside reluctantly and let me in. The moment I rolled my suitcase inside, it felt like I was stepping into a distorted version of my house. Mom's furniture was still there, but it had been rearranged. Diane's tacky farmhouse decor, fake plants, and cheesy signs that said things like live, laugh, love had taken over the mantel and shelves. The old photo of Mom and me on the side table was replaced with a new family photo of Dad, Diane, and Maya. I swallowed hard, my throat tight, but I tried to stay calm. In the living room, Dad was sitting in Mom's old armchair, the one she used to curl up in with a book after work. He looked up from his reading. Dad looked up from his tablet and did a surprised double-take when he saw me. Maya was sprawled on the couch, phone in hand, earbuds in, barely acknowledging my presence. "Hey, you're back," Dad said, trying way too hard to sound upbeat. "Yeah," I answered, forcing a small smile. "Why did you change the locks?" Dad scratched the back of his neck, his usual nervous habit. "Oh, that? I changed them last month. There were some break-ins in the neighborhood, so we did it for safety reasons. You didn't think to give me a new key?" My voice came out sharper than I intended, but the situation already felt off. Diane, who had been standing behind me, quickly spoke up. "We didn't expect you to be here so soon," she said. "I graduated last week," I replied, looking between them. "I told you both I'd be moving back home for my job. I even gave you the exact date." Diane didn't respond. She just crossed her arms and stared at me, as if I were the one who had done something wrong. Dad stood up and motioned toward the office. "Ellie, can we talk privately for a minute?" I followed him, suitcase still in hand, my heart pounding in my chest. Mom's old office looked mostly the same, though I noticed some of her books had been pushed aside to make room for Diane's things. Dad closed the door behind us, and as he turned to face me, I could see it. He was nervous, like he already knew what he was about to say would anger me. "Listen," he started, his voice low, "there's something I need to tell you." Those words made my stomach drop. Dad hesitated, his hands twitching at his sides. "Diane, she thinks this house is mine, that I let you live here after your mom passed." I stared at him, unable to comprehend what he was saying. He sighed and looked down at the floor. "I never told her the truth, that your mom bought the house and left it to you. I told her I gave it to your mom after the divorce, and that it reverted to me when she passed." I couldn't speak. I just stood there, staring at him, feeling like the air had been knocked out of me. This was my house, my mom's house, the one thing she fought so hard to ensure I would have, and he had lied about it to Diane for 4 years. To truly understand the chaos that unfolded, you need some background on me. My mom, Sarah, was the strongest woman I knew. She was a meticulous planner, down to the smallest detail of life. She worked as a senior accountant and was the kind of person who kept everything organized. Receipts, life insurance policies, you name it. She even wrote her will years before she got sick. I used to think it was odd, but now I understand. She always said, "I want to make sure you're okay no matter what." "I had to, Ellie," Dad continued, still not meeting my eyes. "You don't understand what it's like. Diane wouldn't have agreed to live here if she knew it wasn't mine." I finally found my voice, though it came out shakily. "So, you let her think she owns my house, and now you expect me to just disappear?" He grabbed my arm, pleading. No, it's not like that. Just give me a little time to fix this. I'll tell her the truth, I promise, just not yet. I don't want to ruin my marriage." I couldn't believe what I was hearing. My own father was asking me to lie and let them stay in my house, the house my mom worked her whole life to buy, because he was too much of a coward to tell his wife the truth. I took the new keys he handed me for the locks, but I was done. I felt sick, betrayed, and mostly, I felt like an idiot for ever trusting them. I agreed to let him fix things, but deep down, I knew this wouldn't end well. That night, at dinner, the tension was so thick you could practically cut it with a knife. Diane sat at the head of the table, smiling as if nothing was wrong, but I caught her glancing at me now and then, sharp, calculating looks that made my skin crawl. Maya completely ignored me, and Dad barely spoke. I picked at my food, my mind racing. This was just the beginning. I could feel it. You know how sometimes people don't have to say anything outright for you to know exactly how they feel about you? That's what living with Diane turned into. Constant, unspoken hostility wrapped in fake politeness. Dad wasn't much better. He completely avoided me, as though ignoring the situation would make it go away. It felt like I had walked into someone else's house and had overstayed my welcome, even though it was my house. The first few days were awkward, but bearable. I spent most of my time in my room, unpacking, catching up with old friends through texts, and trying to process everything Dad had told me. The tension wasn't as bad at first, more like a quiet sort where you can feel people watching you. Diane would pop into the kitchen while I was making coffee and make passive comments like, "Oh, you're up early, still on a college schedule," or, "Are you cooking for yourself tonight? I didn't realize you'd be eating in." The thing was, she wasn't yelling, but every comment carried an undertone that screamed, "You don't belong here." Then things escalated quickly. One Wednesday morning, I was about to throw in a load of laundry. I had left my clothes sorted in the laundry room and went to grab the detergent. By the time I came back, Diane was pulling my clothes out of the washer and tossing them into a basket. My white shirts were now mixed with dark clothes that hadn't been washed yet. I froze and just watched her for a moment. "Oh," she said, as if only just noticing me. "I thought this was Maya's basket. You really should label things. Mom passed away from intestinal cancer when I was 18. If any of you have been through something similar, you know that watching someone you love deteriorate is heartbreaking. But she fought hard for 4 years and never once complained. She quit her job to focus on treatment, and through it all, she kept planning, making sure all the paperwork for the house, finances, and my future was in order. Before she passed, she sat me down and said, "Ellie, this house is yours now. It's your home, and I want you to always take care of it. Promise me," I said flatly. "Your stuff was sorted, and Maya doesn't do her own laundry, does she?" Her smile became thin and sharp. "Well, I can't keep track of everyone's mess around here," she replied, picking up her cup of tea and walking away, leaving my clothes in a crumpled pile. I knew exactly what she was trying to do. She wanted me to react, to make a scene, but I wasn't going to give her that satisfaction. Later at dinner, she made just enough food for 3 people. I didn't realize it until I sat down and saw 3 plates set, one for her, one for Dad, and one for Maya. She looked up at me and said, "Oh, Ellie, I thought you were eating out tonight. You didn't mention anything." "I live here," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "You didn't ask," I added. She shrugged and gave me a fake sweet smile. "Well, there's bread in the pantry, if you're hungry." I paused for a moment, considering leaving or flipping out on her, but instead I just grabbed my coat and walked out. I couldn't bear sitting at the table with them any longer. I ended up at a local diner, eating a sandwich alone, texting one of my old high school friends. "Please tell me you're free tomorrow. I need to get out of the house," I wrote. The next day, I reconnected with Emily, who still lived nearby. When I told her what was happening, she gave me that wide-eyed, "can't believe this" look. "Wait, they're living in your house acting like you're the guest?" "Ellie, what the hell?" "I don't know what to do," I admitted. "Dad's too much of a coward to tell Diane the truth, and she's making my life miserable. I feel like I'm losing my mind." We spent the afternoon catching up, and for a few hours, I almost felt like myself again. Emily even joked, If she keeps pushing, I'll come over and put her in her place for you." It made me laugh, but when I returned home, the dread hit me all over again. The house was dark and silent. I turned on the hallway light and noticed something odd. My shoes, which I had neatly left by the door, had been moved into the coat closet. It was a small thing, but it clearly showed that Diane didn't want any trace of me in her space. Over the next week, she ramped up her tactics. I'd wake up to find my things moved around, like my coffee mug mysteriously shoved to the back of the cabinet or my mail tossed carelessly into a pile of junk. One morning, I went to take a shower, only to find the hot water was ice cold. Maya had conveniently taken a 45-minute shower right before me. Diane made a point of saying, "Oh, Ellie, I guess you'll just have to get up earlier. Maya's growing, and she takes longer these days." The worst part was watching Maya change. When we were younger, she used to follow me around like a little shadow, calling me her big sister and begging me to braid her hair. Now, she rolled her eyes whenever I walked into the room and muttered things like, "She's so lazy, Mom." I even overheard her on the phone saying, "I don't know why she's still here. It's not even her house." That hurt more than I care to admit. Then there was Dad. I swear I could feel him avoiding me. He would come home late or go for walks whenever Diane started pushing me in front of him. If I caught him alone and tried to talk about it, he'd just mumble something about keeping the peace. Keeping the peace for who? I thought. At the time, I was so young, just weeks away from starting college. I barely understood how any of it worked, but I knew one thing. That house was the last piece of her. She bought it before meeting my dad, worked hard to pay off the mortgage, and built a beautiful life for us there. She made sure it would be mine, no one else's. I hit my breaking point when Diane moved Mom's favorite vase. It had been on the mantel for as long as I could remember, this beautiful ceramic piece with blue flowers painted on it. One day, I came home and found it shoved onto a random shelf in the corner, almost hidden. In its place was one of Diane's tacky rustic pieces, a wooden sign that said, "Home, Sweet Home." I asked her about it directly. "Why did you move the vase?" "Oh," she replied, not even looking up from her tablet. "I just thought it didn't match the new style I'm going for in here. I'm sure you understand." I didn't answer, but inside, I felt something snap. That vase wasn't just decoration, it was a piece of my mom, a memory of her, and Diane had no right to touch it. That night, I started mentally packing up Diane's things. I wasn't ready to act yet, but I knew I couldn't keep living like this. By the time Saturday morning came around, I felt like a stranger in my own home, an unwelcome guest in what was supposed to be my house. The hostility from Diane had become so thick that even walking into the kitchen felt like stepping into enemy territory. I started avoiding the common areas when she or Maya were around, just to preserve my sanity. That morning, though, something was different. I woke up to complete silence. No sounds of Diane clattering around in the kitchen, no pop music blaring from Maya's room, and no Dad watching the morning news on TV. It was eerie. At first, I thought maybe they'd gone out for breakfast or something, but the house felt abandoned. It was too clean. The kitchen counters were spotless, the dining table was empty, and even the shoes that were usually scattered near the front door were gone. I stood there barefoot, still in my pajamas, feeling a sinking sensation in my stomach. I checked my phone. Nothing. No texts, no missed calls. I tried calling Dad first, but it went straight to voicemail. That's odd, I thought. I tried again, but the same thing happened. At this point, I felt like something wasn't right. Maybe it was paranoia from weeks of tension with Diane, but I couldn't shake the feeling that this wasn't just a typical Saturday morning. Finally, I dialed Diane. I was about to hang up after the fourth ring when she picked up. "What do you want?" she snapped. Her tone caught me completely off guard. "I just wanted to know where everyone is. I woke up and the house is empty." She laughed. But it wasn't a normal laugh. It was a mean, ugly sound that made my skin crawl. "Oh, didn't we tell you? We're in the Maldives. You know, sunny beaches, luxury resorts, the whole deal." I blinked, gripping the phone tighter. "The Maldives? First-class flights and everything?" "Yeah," she added, with fake cheer. "We didn't mention it because, frankly, we didn't think you'd care." This is where my dad enters the story. My parents divorced when I was 9. There was no big dramatic fallout, no custody battle, no fighting over property. My dad just left. He met someone else, Diane, and decided he wanted a new life with her. He remarried quickly and had my half-sister, Maya. To his credit, my dad did one thing right. He paid for my college up front by putting money into a separate account, which was his version of child support, I guess. Her voice was sharp as she asked, "You're not exactly in a position to contribute, are you?" My stomach dropped. "What are you talking about?" I demanded, confused. That's when she completely dropped the act. "I'm talking about you living in our house like you're entitled," she snapped. "Your father might be too soft to say it, but I'm not. You're a freeloader, Ellie. You've been mooching off us long enough. Do you have any idea how embarrassing it is to have a grown woman squatting in our house while we're paying all the bills?" I could barely breathe, and my hands trembled as I sank into a kitchen chair, too weak to stand. "It's not your house," I managed to say, my voice choking. "It's my house." She ignored me, continuing without pause. "We're done, Ellie. When we get back, I want you gone. I don't care where you go, sleep on a park bench for all I care, but you're not staying here. If you're still in this house when we return, I'll personally throw you out." In the background, I could hear Maya laughing and Dad saying something I couldn't make out, the sound of it twisting the knife deeper. "Don't even try calling your father," she cut me off coldly. "He agrees with me. He's just too weak to tell you himself. We've already blocked your number. Have a nice life, Ellie." And then she hung up. I sat there in stunned silence. The stillness of the house pressed in on me as I stared at the phone, half expecting her to call back and say it was all some sick joke. But she didn't. My father's silence on the other end was all I needed to confirm it. They were gone on vacation, living it up on some tropical island, while I was left alone in what was supposed to be my house. And the worst part? They planned to throw me out when they returned. For the first few minutes, I just sat there, my mind blank, unable to process what had just happened. I couldn't understand how my dad, my own father, had let this happen. He didn't stop her. He didn't stand up for me. He just let it happen. But the shock didn't last long. It quickly turned into something else, something I hadn't felt in weeks. Rage. They wanted me gone? Fine. But they had forgotten one important thing. This was my house. I spent the next hour sitting there, staring at the walls, replaying the conversation in my mind. Diane's words echoed over and over. Freeloader. Squatter. Embarrassing. It wasn't just what she said. It was how she said it. Like I was some parasite clinging to their perfect lives. Like I didn't belong here. Well, I wasn't going to let her win. By noon, I had a plan. First, I blocked their numbers. I didn't want to hear from any of them, not even my dad. Then, I called an emergency locksmith. The guy asked when I explained what I needed. "As soon as possible," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. The locksmith arrived that afternoon, an older man with kind eyes who didn't ask too many questions. He changed every lock in the house, front door, Back door, garage, everything. It cost me more than I wanted to spend, but at that point, I didn't care. "Does anyone else have keys to these doors?" he asked as he handed me the new set. "Not anymore," I replied. Once the locks were changed, I grabbed some garbage bags and boxes and started packing up their things. I was done pretending like everything was fine. If Diane and Dad thought they could just waltz back into my house after treating me like garbage, they were in for a surprise. I wasn't angry at the time. I just accepted that I wasn't part of his new family anymore. I'd visit them occasionally during the holidays. Diane was never overtly mean, but it was clear she didn't really see me as part of the family. She'd do that thing where she'd invite me to dinner, but act like she hoped I'd decline. "Ellie, you're welcome to join us for dinner," she'd say in this overly enthusiastic tone while stirring something in the pot. It felt so forced that it made my skin crawl. I went room by room. Diane's expensive clothes, her fancy bathroom products cluttering the counters, packed into a bag. Maya's toys, school supplies, and whatever else she had left lying around were boxed up. Dad's golf clubs, ones he never used but always bragged about, went straight into the garage. By the time I finished, the sun was setting, and the garage was packed full of their things. It was exhausting, but it felt good, like I was reclaiming what was mine, piece by piece. That night, I sat on the couch, staring at the clean, empty space that had been overtaken for so long. It felt strange, quiet, but it also felt like home again. I slept better that night than I had in weeks. The next morning, I woke up with a sense of calm I hadn't felt in forever. I brewed myself a cup of coffee, sat in Mom's old chair, and watched the sunlight stream through the window. I knew this was just the beginning. Diane wasn't going to let this go without a fight, and Dad, well, I didn't know what to expect from him anymore. But one thing was certain. I wasn't going anywhere. It was a Friday evening when the storm hit. I had been expecting it. Honestly, I'd spent the entire week mentally preparing for the explosion that would surely come once they returned and saw what I'd done. I even rehearsed what I'd say over and over so I wouldn't stumble or let them manipulate me. That afternoon, I'd come home from work, dropped my bag by the door, and noticed how quiet the house was. It wasn't the eerie, empty quiet I'd felt earlier in the week after Diane's call. No, this was the kind of quiet that felt right. It felt like peace. My peace. I had just sat down with my laptop to catch up on emails when I heard the car pull into the driveway. The sound of tires crunching on gravel made my stomach twist, but I forced myself to stay calm. I didn't move from my spot on the couch as I listened to doors slam, footsteps pounding up the walkway, and then the sound of Diane trying and failing to unlock the front door. She started banging on it immediately. "Ellie!" her voice shrieked. "What the hell is going on? Why won't the door open?" I let her bang for another 30 seconds before I stood up, grabbed the new keys from the counter, and walked to the door. I took my time unlocking it, savoring the brief silence before her yelling resumed. When I finally opened the door, I was met with Diane's furious face. Her hair was a mess, her face was red, and she looked like she wanted to rip my head off. Behind her, Dad stood stiff and awkward, looking anywhere but at me. Maya was hanging back near the car, arms crossed, scowling. "What did you do?" Diane demanded, shoving past me into the entryway. "Why did you change the locks?" I stepped aside and let her storm in. Dad followed quietly, his shoulders hunched, avoiding my gaze. Maya trailed after him, clutching her phone like it was a lifeline. Diane spun to face me, her eyes blazing. "I want an explanation right now." I crossed my arms and met her glare, unflinching. "It's pretty simple," I said. "This is my house, You don't live here anymore. Dad, on the other hand, was always busy working to support his new family. Maya, about 10 years younger than me, was someone I tried to bond with, but I always felt like an outsider whenever I visited their home. You know, when you're somewhere and just feel like you don't belong. That's how it was. They lived in a rented house back then. Nothing special, but comfortable enough. Her mouth dropped open like I'd slapped her. "Your house?" she stammered. "Yes, my house. The house my mom bought. The house she left to me. The one you've been living in under a lie for the last 4 years." For a moment, the room went silent. Diane looked at Dad, her face a mix of confusion and growing anger. "What is she talking about?" Diane demanded. Dad didn't answer. He just stood there, frozen. I turned to him, my voice sharp. "Tell her, Dad. Tell her the truth." Diane spun to face him. "What truth? What is she saying?" Dad mumbled something I couldn't hear. His voice so quiet, I thought he might have been choking on his own guilt. "Speak up," Diane snapped. "What is she talking about?" "Richard," Diane hissed. "What's going on?" Dad finally looked up. His face was pale. "It's true," he said, his voice weak. "The house, it's not mine. It never was. Sarah bought it before we were married. She left it to Ellie in her will." For a second, Diane just stared at him, blinking as though she couldn't comprehend what he had just said. Then her face turned crimson. "When Mom passed away, I had no idea what to do with the house. I was too numb to think clearly. Dad and Diane came over right after the funeral, and to my surprise, they offered to help. Dad said, 'Ellie, you can't live alone right now. It's too much to handle. Let us stay here for the summer, and we'll help take care of things while you get everything figured out.'" "You lied to me," she spat. Dad flinched as if she had struck him. "I didn't mean," he started. "You told me this was your house," she screeched. "You said you let Ellie stay here out of the goodness of your heart. Do you have any idea how stupid this makes me look?" Her voice was loud enough that I was sure the neighbors could hear, but I didn't care. Let her scream. Let her throw her tantrum. I'd spent weeks feeling like a stranger in my own home. She could deal with a little reality. Diane turned back to me, her eyes flashing. "You ungrateful little brat. After everything we've done for you—" I cut her off. "Everything you've done for me? Like what? Trying to erase my mom from this house? Calling me a freeloader? Planning to throw me out? That's not helping, Diane." She opened her mouth to argue, but I wasn't finished. "Your stuff is in the garage. Take it and leave." Finally, Maya spoke up. "Mom, let's just go," she said quietly. For the first time, I saw something other than anger in her expression. Embarrassment, maybe. She glanced at me for half a second before turning away. Diane ignored her. "We are not leaving," she snarled. "This is our home, too."